This video will introduce you to using an index to find statutory law in an annotated code. First, let's quickly review the 4 ways to find what you're looking for in an annotated code. First, you could use a citation, and that will be our next video. Second, you can use an index. Third, you can use a table of contents. And fourth, you could do a word search if we weren't doing this in print. An index is a collection of search terms organized alphabetically that will lead you to what you're looking for. Suppose you have your book about George Washington, and you've heard he had bad teeth and wore dentures, and you wanted to know more about that. What are some search terms you could look for? Teeth, dental, dentures, health, medical. You could look up each of those search terms in the index and see if any of them lead you to where you want to go. That's what an index does. So, how do I use an index? Well, first you think of relevant terms based on your search problem. Then you look those terms up. And if necessary, you think of more terms and look those up. It's very simple. Sometimes using the index approach is the best approach. Sometimes it's not. That's why we learned about the table of contents approach too. We'll do a sample search here in a bit. There are generally 2 different indexes to a code. There's a general index that covers the entire collection. There's an individual code or title index at the back of each code or title. This picture is of Wes Annotated California Codes. At the very end of the set, you can see the general index shelved. It is several volumes long and is paper-bound. It is replaced every year. This picture is of the last volume of the probate code. You can see that it says index at the bottom. In the back of this volume is a shorter index that covers only the probate code. It is updated by the pocket part for that volume. Here's a closer look at the general index. Each volume is labeled with which letters it contains. Early in each volume is a list of the abbreviations it uses. So, for example, if you find a reference to INS 3402, that means Insurance Code Section 3402. Now here's a list of some confusing things you will see in an index. It's just a matter of knowing what each one is trying to tell you. Let's look at a couple of examples. I picked this first example because it shows you 4 of the terms on the previous slide. This is actually the beginning of the heading for cats in the index. See also means you should look elsewhere in the index for related terms, such as animals and pets. That can be very helpful if you haven't thought of any other search terms. Generally, this index is telling you to look for that word, for example, animals, in a different part of the index, perhaps in a different volume. The volume that contains cats does not also include the letter A, so you would have to go to a different volume to look up animals. Generally, and then the cite to a statute section is telling you that you're going to find out generally, in this case, about food and agriculture in sections 31,751 et sec of the Food and Agriculture Code. Now you're probably wondering what et sec means. Well, it means and following. So it's referring to the section numbers that follow 31,751. So for example, this information that it's referring you to may be in 31,751 all the way to 31,775. So it's referring to 31,751 and then other sections afterwards. The second example here is from a different heading. It's from the colleges and universities heading. It shows the use of the word anti. Suppose you were trying to find out about sex discrimination at colleges and universities, so you looked up colleges and universities, and then under it you looked up the subheading sex. Under that you see discrimination, after which it says the word anti. That means you should stay under the heading colleges and universities and look for the subheading discrimination. Anti means before, just like Antebellum period was the time before the Civil War. Ante is telling you to look earlier in the same heading. If it said post instead of ante, it would be telling you to look later in the same heading. Now that we know the basics, let's try using an index for a search. You know what you need to know about Aunt Birgit's mental capacity, but you're wondering what the requirements are for a pet care trust and even whether they're allowed. What search terms might you use? Think of both broad and narrow terms. Cat is very narrow. Pet is broader. Animal is broader still. Care is very broad because it could refer to animals or humans. Trust is broad in one sense, a whole category of law, but narrow in another sense because it eliminates all the other categories of law. Can you think of any others? There's more than one way to find something in an index, and any one or more of these might get you to your destination, or none of them might work, in which case you need to think of other search terms or use a different approach. Let's look up cat, pet, and trust to see how we would do with those. These two pages include the entire cat heading in the index. You see the headings are capitalized and bolded. So this first page starts with the end of caterers and then goes to caterpillar tractors, then catfish, then cathedral city, and so forth until we get to cats. What are some subheadings you can look for under the heading cat? Look for trust. Well, there's nothing there. How about will? Nothing there. What about care? Again, nothing there. So the search term cat is probably too narrow. Let's try something broader, pet. Now these three pages include the entire pet heading in this index. What subheadings could you look under? Let's start with care. You find care trusts, and it refers you to probate code section 15212. That could be it. But let's keep looking. Let's also look under the subheading trusts. It says trusts and trustees, care trusts, and refers you to the same code section. Normally you would go now to see if that code section is what you need, but before you do, let's take a look at one more heading in the index, trusts. The trust heading goes on for many pages in the index, so I've just pulled out the one we need. I look for the subheading pets, and I find pets care trust and the same code section. I could do this also in the smaller volume index at the back of the last volume of the code rather than use the big code index, but the process is the same, so I'll save time and not do it. So this is the beginning of the probate code section 15212. The language of this section goes on for another page, and then it is followed by the annotations. You can see that it says an animal care trust is lawful, but you will want to read the entire section so you can be sure your aunt's lawyer set it up correctly. If the trust isn't set up properly, it might be unenforceable, and you might still succeed in your efforts to inherit from your aunt. Now you know the basics of using an index to a code. The best way to get good at using an index is to learn legal terminology and practice. So think of some issues you're interested in and swing by the law library to practice using the index. Our next video will be about finding statutes using citations.